Really excited about today's episode, guys, with Scott Linebrink, the former Major League Baseball pitcher. And you know, when you talk to a former Major League Baseball pitcher, they have tons of stories. And we get to hear a few of them here today on Sports Spectrum.
This is Sports Spectrum, the intersection of sports and faith, where we bring Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the show. I am Jason, and this is the Sports Spectrum podcast. We're so glad that you're tuning into our show. Be sure to like and subscribe and download this podcast. Tell someone about the Sports Spectrum's podcast, the intersection of sports and faith in Jesus Christ. Make sure you check out our website as well for all of our content, podcasts, devotionals, stories, articles, you name it. It's available at sportspectrum.com. And while you're there, you can also sign up for our weekly newsletter. It's free. And when you sign up, we have a free devotional to send you, a 10-day devotional written by professional athletes themselves as a free gift to go through with your team, maybe to just read yourself, encourage you in your walk. You can do that at sportspectrum.com and click that newsletter icon and sign up for our weekly newsletter and get that free 10-day daily devotional. Today on the show, we welcome Scott Linebrink, the former Major League Baseball pitcher, 12 years in the majors with the Giants, Astros, Padres, Brewers, White Sox, and Atlanta Braves. In 2004 and 2005, as the setup pitcher for Trevor Hoffman, Scott Linebrink went 15-4 in those 2 years, and he had an E.R.A. of 2.14 in 04 and 1.83 in 2005. Those are dominant numbers in helping set up one of the great closers of all time, Trevor Hoffman. And Scott Linebrink now is working with an unbelievable ministry, and you probably know about them because we've talked about them here on the show. It's Water Mission. And this year marks Water Mission's 20th anniversary of providing access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions for people in developing countries and disaster areas. Think about this. 2.2 billion people are still in need of safe water, and Water Mission is doing something about it. Their website's watermission.org. We're going to talk about Water Mission with Scott here on the show as the partnerships director with that great ministry. Scott is also the host of Sports Spectrum's produced Get in the Game podcast. If you have not heard Get in the Game, well, let's go. Get in the Game. It debuted March 19th. Guests have included Albert Pujols, Andy Pettitte, Dave Roberts, Jim Thome, Trevor Hoffman. I count 2 Hall of Famers, a third that probably is going to be there, a fourth that maybe should be, and a World Series champion manager. That's pretty good. Those are some pretty good names to debut a podcast with, and Scott Linebrink has done a fantastic job with his Get in the Game podcast. So we talk about it all here today on Sports Spectrum's podcast with Scott Linebrink, 12 years in the major leagues as a pitcher. Let's take a listen to our conversation with Scott. What's up, Scott Linebrink? How are you, buddy?
I'm good. Thanks, Jason. It's an honor to be here.
Absolutely. Now, you also host our Sports Spectrum Get in the Game podcast. It debuted back in March, and I want to start there. This newest venture, you got the professional microphone as I look at you on Zoom here and as we record this. I love that you're doing this podcast, and you're really good. You're a good, what I like to call conversation facilitator, not interviewer, because I think the great podcasts are more conversational than just question and answer. And I like that a lot better than interviewer. I think you're doing a wonderful job. How are you enjoying this podcast journey? Get in the Game. How's it been going?
It is an absolute joy for me, Jason. And first of all, I'll say I was well coached. You prepared me well, told me what microphone to get, told me, how to ask questions. I've really enjoyed your podcast and have learned a lot from that. I'm a podcast fan, so I listen to 3 or 4 podcasts a day. So I love the idea. I love what you told me about how a podcast really allows for a lot of content. And, when we talk about emails and text messages and videos, we try to keep it as short as possible. But a podcast allows for just a casual conversation that could be 30, 45 hour long. So it's been fun and reconnecting with some of my buddies that I don't often talk to, but maybe once or twice a year. It's really just reminded me of the great relationships. And when I when I think about my time in the game, that's the one takeaway, is just the solid relationships that I was able to have with 7 different teams and, playing over the course of 15 years. That's what I really enjoy, and that's what I'll always take with me.
Well, even the people that you didn't play with, like, as people listen to this podcast, I want them to also go listen to Get in the Game. And when I say these names, you'll say, oh, we got to go listen to that show too. Albert Pujols, Andy Pettitte, Dave Roberts, the Dodgers manager, Jim Thome, the Hall of Famer, Trevor Hoffman, your former teammate with the Padres. Like, these are guys that are really big names. So you're also getting those big names to talk to. But it is about the relationships, right? You found, I think, in talking to it's almost like rekindling relationships with guys that you either played with or played against, and just have this. There is such a unique bond in that baseball community of guys who played together, isn't there?
There is. And when you talk about those guys, I mean, a lot of them, my teammates, I mean, that was one of my true joys is just wearing the same uniform as some of these guys. And now seeing them inducted into the Hall of Fame, they were certainly on a different level than I was in terms of talent. But, they taught me a lot. And behind it all, behind the uniform, and that's what I really want to uncover in this podcast, is there's some really good guys behind that uniform. And they really have a heart for giving back, for serving people. And they have used their platform in amazing ways. And honestly, Jason, if I could sum up what I believe God has positioned me to do, and what I want to do, and I'm able to do that with Water Mission, but I want to help people find their passion. Where is God calling them to? How has He equipped them? And just be a guide as someone who has, really taken, I believe, the next step after the career and transitioned into something else that's bigger than myself. Is, how can I encourage others to do the same thing?
I want to talk about that transition in a second. Transitioning from the game into an unbelievable ministry and partnership with Water Mission. The idea of this podcast, you kind of mentioned it, is giving back and serving. Your podcast, I'm talking about Get in the Game, because it's weird talking about a podcast on another podcast. So I have to make sure I'm clear on that. Get in the Game podcast, produced by Sports Spectrum, hosted by our guest, Scott Linebrink. So what did serving and giving back look like for you when you were playing? Is that something that began when you're playing, or did the heart begin to take shape after you kind of said goodbye to baseball?
Well, it happened during the game. I think it was a gradual progression, because early on, I'll be honest, I mean, you're really just in survival mode. You're trying to figure out, how do I get there? Once you get there, how do I stay there? How do I continue to find my niche in the game that's going to make me successful? And just really try to exploit that as much as possible. There's a lot of just things going on, noise in the game that you try to drown out. For me, it was all about trying to keep things as simple as possible. But I think once I got past, the survival mode and felt like, okay, I'm here, I'm somewhat established. Now what? And a lot of that is part of my faith journey too. That I realized that God positioned me in a very unique role and career. Not just so that I could, experience fame and glory for myself, but what could I do to bring honor and glory to His name? And that was really transformational for me. And part of that ended up being this question of, how can I use my platform to serve other people? It really started, I think, in San Diego. And of course, that's a big military town. I've had a lot of family members that served in the military. And so for me, it was, hey, how can we really honor these guys for the sacrifice that they're making for their country, for me, so that we can come out here and play a game. And there was some really rewarding experiences there in San Diego. Sandy Alderson was our assistant GM at the time. Sandy is former military, and he was really one that inspired me too, that, hey, these guys, they're just like you guys. I mean, they love to talk shop. They love to come out to the field and hang out with guys. We loved going over to places like Coronado Island and seeing the grinder and seeing, buds where the SEALs train. Whenever we would go to the DC area, we would go to places like Bethesda and Walter Reed and visit guys that had come back and were injured. And just a chance to be there and hear their stories. That's the one thing I heard from a lot of the nurses is these guys just need to tell their story. There's a lot of healing that comes from being able to share and talk about their experiences. And of course, some of those experiences I still take with me today. I'll never forget this one kid who was, I have to call him a kid because I think he was 19 or 20 years old. He had been in Afghanistan and he came back. He was a triple amputee. He'd lost both his legs and an arm, and he was laying in a hospital bed. And he was really just figuring out that he was back in the United States. Like he had woken up, and he had gone from Afghanistan to Germany for a period of time, and now he was back in the States. His young wife was there with their baby, their infant son. And I just think about all the things coming down on this guy. He's coping with a life that's going to be completely different now. He's meeting his son for the first time. He's just grasping the fact that he's not in Afghanistan. I just felt my heart just went out to this kid. And what can I tell somebody like that? But just to be there and say thank you. I appreciate what you did. It seems so minor compared to the sacrifice that he made. But I know that meant a lot. And other guys that we had out on the field that would come down for batting practice and meet the players and even get in there and take a few swings. It was a huge joy for them. And it was just a great experience for me to be a part of.
I love that story. And I think about, it's funny, I've never been to a Walter Reed or anything like that. You hear the stories, and you understand like you're getting an opportunity because you wear a uniform, right? A baseball uniform, to see and to experience things that a lot of people don't experience. Now that's on some ends of going to, stadiums and behind the scenes and locker rooms and playing with Hall of Famers, like you said, but it's also those moments like you described, meeting a triple amputee, and seeing those that are in really tough situations. And that's kind of transferred over now into Water Mission too. You've seen some things in Water Mission, I have to imagine, in your work with them that have been probably some really tough situations as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So this working with Water Mission happened after the baseball career, and I was introduced to them through a good friend of mine who had heard the founders speak and heard their testimony of faith and how they had taken a very successful for-profit company, an engineering company, and it all came about from a disaster that happened down in Honduras. And they thought, how can we use our gifts and talents to help the people that are down there suffering in Honduras? And they found out that one of the biggest problems was water. They had water everywhere. It was completely flooded, but none of it was safe to drink. And so they went down there, they developed a system that was able to filter water, make it safe to drink. And they realized that not only is it a disaster now because of this hurricane, but this is a disaster every day of the year. And they found out it wasn't just limited to Honduras. It was all over the world. And in fact, 30% of the world, over 2 billion people, to this day don't have access to safe water. And the ramifications that come from that are just mind-boggling. I mean, you talk about a lack of opportunity from an education standpoint. I always talk about John 10:10, that God wants us to live a life of abundance. And there's so many people that can't experience abundance because they don't have basic necessities. And so the fact that we can come in and provide at least a water and a sanitation solution, that becomes really foundational in terms of building blocks for education and medical and shelter and all of the other basic needs that need to follow. But that's what I loved about this ministry, is that it's starting with the most basic need. I mean, other than the air we breathe, we have to have water. We can't make it 3 days without water. And so that kind of started me on a new trajectory of serving. But to your question, yes, we have been to some places that really opened my eyes to see what true poverty really looks like. And one of the first places we went was Haiti. And this was before I ever went to work for Water Mission. But at this point, we were just involved in a giving capacity. And my wife and I went there. And I tell people all the time, that's where the rubber hit the road. Because I think for guys in my position, it's easy sometimes to write checks. It's, hey, I want to support. And so I can do that. And I can feel good about stewarding God's blessings to me, then give to others. And yes, I would very much say that that's a part of it. But when I talk to people about how to engage, what does true heart engagement look like? Spending time and going to the place that you're serving brings it to a whole nother level. Because then I think you also engage from a prayer level a lot more. And then you become an advocate. And so, I can't help but tell everybody about the work that we're doing too. So when you combine giving with going and praying and advocating, that's where we see complete partnership and complete engagement, and the networking that's happened and the things that I'm able to do and share with people, the work that we're doing around the world is something that just really comes naturally. I mean, this is my job, but I feel like I would do it anyway, even if I didn't work for Water Mission.
We're going to talk a lot about Water Mission here as we keep going. Scott Linebrink is our guest here on Sports Spectrum. I do want to go back to your playing career for 1 second, and then we'll get into transitioning out. Do you have a story, a fun story? Because I think every baseball player I've ever talked to, especially those who are out of the game now, I mean, that's it, right? You come away with these amazing stories. I personally think every baseball player that plays more than 5 years, whether it's minors or majors, could write multiple books about the experiences that they've had and the stories that they've had. I'm sure you're smiling because you know you could probably write like 10 books on all the different things you've went through. You played 12 years in the majors, but you also had minor league journeys as well, and ups and downs and things like that. Do you have one that you can share? I don't want to call it your favorite because I'm sure there's some that maybe are, maybe it's a little too adultish to share on a podcast like ours, but do you have a story you could share of a time, just a fun story?
Well, I'm thinking about, the congressional reports and how they're heavily redacted. And I'm thinking maybe some of these books might have to be heavily redacted because they might be a little incriminating.
It's all about recollection, right? How you recall it.
Yeah. The names will remain anonymous here, but I'll keep it to me.
Okay.
I think about one particular time where, the bullpen phone rings, and a lot of times in the middle of I pitched in the 7th and 8th inning. So, I mean, it's typically a tight game, an intense situation. There might be multiple guys getting loose down there. Mm-hmm. And there are opportunities for miscommunication. And in this case, that's exactly what happened. We had a couple of guys warming up, might have even had 3 guys warming up. And the call came down and it was my name called. And so, once you hear your name, it's like, okay, I mean, you flipped a switch and there's no going back. Like, I mean, the horse is out of the barn. And so,
yeah.
I'm in my mind or who I'm going to face, like head is down, going through the gate, running out. I mean, I'm not thinking about anything else. And I think I got almost all the way to shortstop when I hear like a commotion, people screaming and hollering. And I look up and it was Bruce Bochy and he's just waving me off, like, doing this. And I'm like, what? What's going on? I mean, this is totally different than anything I've seen. And I turn around and look, and there's another guy coming out the bullpen gate. And so I was the one that had to turn around and make the walk of shame back across the outfield. And you can imagine there was some fans taking advantage of that and letting me have it. But
were you home or on the road for that game? Do you remember?
I think we were home. So,
okay.
Luckily it wasn't as bad as it could have been in a place like New York or Philadelphia. But yeah, it certainly was a little humbling. And then, you get back there and it's like, hey, what's going on, guys? Like, now the next time you get the call, it's like, okay, am I really going out? And there's a little, tentative hesitancy. But
do you remember if you pitched in that game eventually? Does that? I mean, I know there's like a million games that you played. So does that ring a bell that you might have got into that game? Do you think?
I want to say that I did get in that game, and there was a good laugh about it after the fact. Which leads me to believe that the outcome of the game was probably positive. So
that's funny.
These are things we laugh about, but. Another story I remember, this did not turn out positive. I was pitching in Chicago with the White Sox, and Ozzie Guillen was my manager, who was a colorful character.
Oh, yeah.
And there was one particular time where I did not have a good inning at all. And matter of fact, it ended in a home run. And usually what happens is, after you give up the home run, the umpire will step out in front of home plate, and after the guy crosses home plate, then he gives you another ball. Well, in this case, it was like the 3rd or 4th run that I had given up, and so I was completely incensed. I think I was back behind the mound, walking around, just fuming, and so he was out in front of the plate, ready to give me the ball, but I was not receiving it. And Ozzie passed the guy that hit the home run at the third base foul line, probably gave him a high five because he was ready to get me out of there. He was mad with me too. So like everybody's mad. We're all focused on getting me out of the game as quickly as possible to stop the damage. And so Ozzie comes out there and, traditionally what you do is you hand the manager the ball. And that was always Ozzy's thing, is don't slam the ball in my hand. Don't throw it at me. Just place the ball in my hand. Mm-hmm. And so as I'm walking off the field, he's coming out to get the ball. And I just kind of walk past him because I don't have a ball. And he's like, he goes, hey, where's the ball? Kind of mad at me. Like, I'm just blowing him off. I was like, the ball's up in the 10th row of right field. Go get it if you want it. So, yeah, I was able to remember. I was able to apologize afterwards because that was a little snarky of me, but we had a good laugh about it.
I have to imagine, though, as a Christian, as a man of faith who wants to live right and be a Christ-like example, there's still moments when you're going to just lose it. I mean, it's funny. We'll post something on Sports Spectrum, Scott, and, it'll highlight like a coach or a player talking about Jesus, right? Or living out that Christian walk. And somebody will find a place on social media and comment, is this the same guy that said the F word 3 times yesterday? Right. And I'm thinking, yep, it is. Because he's probably a fallen sinner just like everyone else is. And we all have our moments when we blow up. Was that ever something that you had to think about when you were playing? Because it's easy when it goes well, everybody's great. But when it doesn't go well, I remember asking James McCann this too, the Mets catcher. There's a moment where you have to kind of check yourself and be like, all right, I could really take this farther, or I could just try to not be joyful, but try to be like, all right, a good example here. A lot of people are watching. That's hard, isn't it?
It absolutely is. I mean, baseball is a very refined game. There's a lot of preparation that goes on that people don't see. And, for me, if you truly care about your craft and the time that you've spent, and you think about it, this is time spent away from your family. You're putting yourself in a lot of uncomfortable situations. And frankly, it comes down to, this is a dedication. I mean, I feel like in a lot of ways, to be a professional athlete, you have to engage yourself at a much deeper level than the person who's at an 8-to-5 job. I mean, this is who you are. And that's a whole nother conversation because we know that we have an identity in Christ. Yeah. But that is the pull sometimes, is that, this is representative of everything about you. And so you can't help but care. And so when things go wrong, I mean, if you care, if you're, a red-blooded individual, you're going to get upset. And so for me, it was about authenticity. It wasn't, being the Christian guy that's going to say, well, gosh darn it, heck, I guess we'll just get them next time. Like, that's not authentic.
Yeah.
And guys would recognize that too. I mean, these are guys that we spend a lot of time with. We spend most of the day, we travel with them, we eat together, we shower together. Like, there's not a whole lot that we can hide. Yeah. And so, the fact that we can be an authentic human being every now and then and get upset and mad and maybe throw something, maybe let an F-bomb slip, but then be able to ask for forgiveness and say, you know what, I was wrong. And I remember doing that a couple of times, mostly with catchers, I think, because I would get really upset. And, sometimes you naturally want to play the blame game. Why'd you call that pitch? Something like that. But I think the fact that you can show an honest reaction in a time of stress, and then you can come back and say, forgive me. I think that means more than trying to suppress or hide your true emotion and have guys go, what's really inside there? How come you're not showing me?
Yeah, that's good. As you transitioned out of the game, I think your last year pitching was 11, but you were in the minor leagues in 12. I think you were with the Cardinals, and then you retired in 2012, and that was it, right? And so you're 36, I think, at that time, or 35, and suddenly you're not playing the game that you played since you were a little boy. What was transitioning like? And take us to not just being a part of Water Mission, like you described in, initially giving, but actually coming on staff with them. And that's a different purpose. That's a different animal than just, finding a place to serve. This is, this is where your life is in a lot of ways now, with your family as you serve with Water Mission and work with them. So what was that transition like into eventually going to work with Water Mission?
Yeah, the transition, I think, was tougher than I thought it was going to be. I was one of those guys that I was really looking for an exit strategy probably the last 4 or 5 years of my career. And not to say that I didn't appreciate it or enjoy the time, but it's tough. It's very tough being a family man, too, and going through some struggles, not just on the field, but just logistics with a family, a young family and kids. And, it really puts a stress on a marriage. And I just remember thinking, man, I really want to just be in one place, be a dad, be able to drive my kids to school, not miss out on my siblings' weddings and funerals that I should have been at, but I couldn't because I was playing the game. I was really looking forward to that. And so I always thought when the career ended, it would just be like, hallelujah. I really appreciated that time, but I'm totally ready for the next stage of life. I don't think we realize how much it is a part of us. And I think that there probably was some mourning and grieving after the career ended, because for me, it was an injury. And I always wondered, how would that last game play out? Am I just going to be terrible for the last 6 months of my career? Am I going to be ineffective and not be able to walk away gracefully? In a way, I was almost grateful for the fact that it was a decision that was basically made for me, because I had a shoulder injury that I ended up ultimately having surgery on. There was like 3 different things wrong. You mentioned, being mid-30s at that point, and it wasn't feasible for me to come back. I would have had to gone back to the minor leagues, work my way back up. After 15 years, I just thought, I think the writing's on the wall. So one of the first things I did was go back to school, because I always told people when I'm done with baseball, I want to get my degree, which sounds a whole lot better when you say that than actually going back to school and getting your degree.
Right.
I walked back into college as a 36-year-old. I think by that time I was 37 or 38, and I'm twice as old as everybody else. The advent of the internet has completely passed me by. When I was in college back in the mid 90s and late 90s, you had to sign up for time in the computer lab so that you could go write your paper on the big PCs.
Yeah, we're the same age. I remember that.
Yeah. So now all of a sudden, we're doing virtual blackboards and, programming and all this stuff that I was completely unaware of. And I'm walking back in as a junior, so I'm going into junior level classes, and I didn't just take the easy, basic studies degree or do the handout degree. I was actually an environmental science major with a minor in biology.
Wow.
And so it was tough, but I made it through. The one thing that the baseball career showed me was that it gave me a high level of discipline and adaptability. And so I was basically willing to work hard and adapt and learn. And after a year and a half of taking 15, 16 hours a semester, I graduated. And it was during that time that introduction to water mission happened. And we went on that trip to Haiti. And eventually they offered me a position to come and be an ambassador. And so I thought, wow, what a great way to transition. I didn't know what I was going to be doing, but I feel like God really answered that prayer, that I wanted to do something that would mean something, and that was, something I was passionate about. And so the ability to combine a lot of environmental stuff that I was really concerned with, also with a ministry and also helping people, I just feel like checked a lot of boxes for me.
Yeah, they do amazing work. It's watermission.org is the website. So why don't you spend just a second telling everyone what Water Mission is? I know we've kind of danced around and we've talked about, it's clean water and sanitation, but go in deep into what they are and the work that they're doing. I think this is, am I right, 20th year this year and last
That's
year
right.
that they've been in effect. So it hasn't been around a very long time. When I was introduced to Water Mission at probably a similar conference that you were introduced to them at, I was just blown away on some of the stats and the numbers. And I've shared it here on the show when Water Mission has been a partner with us for a while. And I've shared that on some of the sponsorship opportunities, just the numbers, the billions, millions and billions are what we're talking about here. People who don't even have the basic things like water and sanitation. So tell us about Water Mission, what its mission is and what they do.
Yeah, so I mentioned that storm in Honduras. That was actually in 1998. And so that started the path of turning this into a business, a nonprofit. And 2001, they officially launched. And so this is our 20th year. We are a Christian engineering nonprofit. And those are three operative words that we talk about. We lead with our faith. The reason that we do what we do is because of our faith in God. Yeah. And because we believe that serving our neighbor means that my neighbor, not just across the street or in another state, but in another country and across the world, deserve the same water that I drink here. For me, having two children, seeing the effects on kids is probably the most heartbreaking thing. And thinking that if I had to give my kids water to drink that would make them constantly sick and they would have to miss school, and in some cases die. I mean, I remember hearing one story early on that there was a community, and I think I shared this even at the NFL PAO conference, but there was a community that was waiting. They would wait to name their kids until they were a year old because the infant mortality rate was so high. And I just thought, how is that possible? I mean, the fact that you wouldn't be able to connect with your own child because you're worried about them dying from a disease that is completely preventable. And our CEO says that all the time. So there's not a contaminant known to man that cannot be filtered from water and make it safe to drink. And so that's what we're doing. We're going around to in a lot of places, rural communities, and we're putting in infrastructure that they otherwise would not have access to. So we're drilling wells, we're putting in filtration equipment, pumps that are run off solar power so that they don't have to rely on rolling blackouts and insufficient power grid. And then we're also providing a way to distribute that, to get it to the people in the community. And we're doing a ton of what we call community development work. And this I describe as the insurance on the program. And it is working with people. It's teaching them hygiene skills. It's teaching them leadership and management skills. It's teaching them how to maintain that system so that when we leave, they know what to do to keep it running. Financial sustainability is a huge aspect of it too. So, there's things that we do that make sure that project is sustainable and lasts, hopefully in perpetuity, because what we do is the end users that are getting this water are paying for it. And it's very affordable. We're talking pennies and nickels in most cases. But that money is collected by the treasurer of that community, also an end user, and they save that money over time so that in years from now, when one of the parts breaks down, they've actually accumulated thousands of dollars, which is incredibly empowering for a community that's stuck in a cycle of poverty. Yeah. They can use their own money now, and they can buy a replacement pump or a solar panel, and so that's a big deal for them. And it's a difference between someone it's feeding a fish versus teaching a man to fish, but it's also the fact that this is ours. There's a stakeholder mentality. It's not, hey, this company came in and put in this water project, and when it breaks, they should come back and fix it so that we can have water. No, they've invested in it now, and they want to see it go forward. And so they use their own resources to keep it running. And that's a huge difference. And it doesn't just hold true for water, but any kind of community development project. You've got to create a stakeholder mentality.
It's watermission.org is the website. I love what they're about. And the cool thing is you've gotten some of your baseball friends to be a part of this, right? I know Adam Wainwright, who's been on this show, is a huge advocate for Water Mission. Can you kind of share briefly some of the players and some of the ways that Water Mission has partnered with professional athletes, specifically in the baseball world?
Yeah, well, it was actually our financial advisor, Don Christensen, who brought several of us together initially. And one of my teammates up in Chicago, Gavin Floyd, was one of them. Lance Berkman was another one. But yes, it's been something that I've been passionate about, and it's very easy for me to share the story of, hey, I'd love for you just to take a look at this because I'm engaged, I'm invested. Sure. And what I hear quite often from guys is, again, going back to the relationship piece, because I have that relationship with you, Scott, because I trust you, If you tell me that it's something that's worthwhile, I'll go check it out.
Right.
And then for me, it just really becomes being a guide and asking questions. And, going back to the podcast, I think that's what equipped me for that is it's really fun to get to know people, and you get to know them by asking them questions. And so you start to learn that, hey, this guy's wife was actually on a trip to Uganda 10 years ago, and they've got a real heart for Uganda. Well, let me tell you about the work we're doing in refugee camps over there and how we're serving people.
Right.
And so it's questions like that really allow me to get to know guys, and then again, just help them see, God has planted a seed in your heart to help people because of an experience previously. And here's how we can nurture that. Here's how we can water it and see it grow. And I love going back then after a project and reporting on, man, let me tell you some really cool stories of how your generosity changed these people's lives. And I think that's fun for anybody to hear and know that it wasn't just something, done for a short time. It wasn't a Band-Aid that created a partial solution, but it's actually going to change the trajectory of that community forever.
Yeah. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the picture that's over Scott's left shoulder of this little kid. I think it looks like a little boy. I'm not sure, but a little kid who's holding in their hand what looks like clean water and just simply smiling, looking up at the camera and saying, this is amazing that I get to have this clean water. So if you want to know the impact, just that picture alone, I think describes, a million thoughts that go in my brain on why we, the Romano household here in Connecticut, are partners with Water Mission, and we donate our money each month to the cause because we believe in it. And I just think they do such amazing work. As we wind down here, Scott Linebrink, who is also, let me get one more plug in for the podcast, the host of the Sports Spectrum produced Get in the Game podcast. He's also the Water Mission Partnerships Director. And again, the website's watermission.org. Recently, and this will probably be where we land the plane, Water Mission isn't just about providing clean water for people in Uganda and all over, the world, which is incredible, by the way, for those people who don't have it that can now access it. It's amazing. But recently, I saw you guys were responding to the crisis that took place in Texas a couple months back that you were living through because you live in Texas. So Water Mission isn't just about overseas. They actually do a lot of work and help here in the U.S. as well.
Well, I would say most of the work is overseas. Our focus is really the Caribbean, Latin American countries, down to South America, Southeast Africa, and Indonesia. But we do disaster response models, which is how this situation in Texas arose. We've actually only had 3 responses within the United States, but this ended up being one of them. And I think what it does is it shows that we're willing to go where the biggest need is. Right now, we're responding to a volcano that erupted in St. Vincent that maybe a lot of people don't even know about, but it has displaced tens of thousands of people. And so our team is there now. Yeah, good question. It is down somewhere in southern Caribbean.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah. Wow. But it's basically an island nation. They've had a series of volcanoes over the years, but this ended up being a really big one. And ash contaminates the water source, and so there's no way to get safe water to drink. And so we're down there right now helping folks out. But Texas ended up being a place that we saw a great need that we thought we could help. One of the biggest issues was supplies. Whenever the storm hit, here in Texas, we're not built like the houses that are built up north. And so a lot of the exterior pipes froze. And when water freezes, it expands. And so it busts the pipes. And when the water thawed, people's homes were flooding left and right. And we called this an invisible disaster because you really couldn't see it. It wasn't like a tornado or an earthquake that you can look and you can see which houses are destroyed.
Right.
The houses look fine on the outside, but it was water literally running from the upstairs into the kitchen, completely destroying everything. So people had to turn their water off. Otherwise, their house would just continue to flood. So literally people had no water because they had no infrastructure in their house to deliver that water. And so we looked at that as an engineering organization. We look at every issue and say, what's the problem? What's the solution? How can we implement the solution to help people? And this very much was a case of people not having access to water. And in a place right here in my backyard, it seemed completely unlikely, but that's what happened. And so we mobilized a lot of plumbing parts, so PVC pipe, couplers, joints, anything that we could procure from not only our office in Charleston, South Carolina, but around the world with our vendors and our corporate partners. And we got that material here to Texas. And then we worked with a group called Plumbers Without Borders that I had no idea that existed. But these guys were actually the volunteers that were going out, taking that material, going into people's homes, fixing their pipes, getting the water turned back on. And it was really just an amazing thing. I was able to be a part of this and see the work going on. And one of the coolest stories was there was two guys that came from the Northwest, and they were part of this Plumbers Without Borders network.
Right.
And every day we would do daily devotions with the plumbers before they would go out on their job sites. And these guys were a part of those devotions. And they, over the course of the week, heard about the gospel, about salvation, and how that comes to people who confess with their mouth and believe in their heart. And by the end of the week, they gave their life to Christ and were baptized.
Wow.
And it was really cool to see that happen. And of course, a lot of opportunities. I had opportunities to pray with people in their homes that we were coming in and serving. One woman actually told me that the night before we showed up, she had prayed with her friend, and she was feeling very discouraged. And her friend told her, said, "I see angels all around your house, and I believe that God's gonna come and help you." And the next day, our plumber showed up and fixed her house, and she said, "I know that your plumbers are the angels that I prayed for." So, just really cool to see how the Holy Spirit guided and directed that response. You know, that's affirmation to us that we're in the right spot, doing the things that God has us to do, and it's so cool to see that play out.
I love hearing that. And I think that's what people remember when you're getting involved with an organization that's Christ-centered, like Water Mission. Yes, the mission is to provide clean water and access for everyone, but there's also the gospel that can go out and go forth. And when you reach people for Jesus, like that's the ultimate end goal in all of this, right? We want to give clean water. We want to reach people with stories like on Sports Spectrum, what we're doing with Get in the Games podcast. But the ultimate goal is to reach people for the gospel. And when you can see that, tangibly see someone give their life to Christ, man, that just is the greatest, I think, sense of joy that you can have in the work that we get to do, Scott Linebrink. Thanks for being here, buddy. Watermission.org, again, is the website. And I'll tell people on the back end when we say goodbye a little bit more about Water Mission and direct them to the website. But watermission.org is the place to go. We'll have to get you back on again and start talking about, maybe we debrief some of your podcast interviews, my friend, because you're having some studs on the show. When you talk about Albert Pujols, Andy Pettitte, Dave Roberts, Jim Thome, Trevor Hoffman, like, keep it going, my friend. You're doing a great job. So we really appreciate it, and continued success, my friend.
Absolutely. I've really enjoyed this interview and encourage you to go check out the Get in the Game podcast.
Absolutely. We will. And watermission.org is the website as well. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Love that conversation with Scott Linebrink. He is the Director of Partnerships with Water Mission, and you can check out watermission.org to learn more. Again, providing safe water for 2.2 billion people who are still in need. When I hear that number, it just blows my mind. And I'm so honored to be a part of Water Mission, have them be partners with us here at Sports Spectrum, providing access to safe water, sanitation, and hygiene solutions in developing countries and disaster areas. Check them out again at watermission.org. And we thank Scott for being here on the show. Make sure you also check out his podcast, Get in the Game, Sports Spectrum's Get in the Game podcast, part of the Sports Spectrum Podcast Network. It debuted back in March, on March 19th. He's had incredible guests: Albert Pujols, Andy Pettitte, Dave Roberts, Jim Thome, Trevor Hoffman. If you're a baseball fan, you know those names. 2 Hall of Famers, a third in Albert Pujols, who's definitely going to be in the Hall of Fame, and guys like Andy Pettitte, who's one of the great postseason pitchers of all time, and Dave Roberts, who's a Hall of Fame coach, if you will, as a World Series championship manager with the Los Angeles Dodgers. So incredible guests. Make sure you go check out Get in the Game. We'll put a link to Water Mission. We'll put a link to Get in the Game in the show notes, and you can check that out after we're done with this podcast. We do appreciate you tuning in. Make sure you also check out all of Sports Spectrum's content at our website, sportspectrum.com, and tell someone about this show. Word of mouth is huge with us, and it allows us to grow and have our show heard by more people. The intersection of sports and faith in Jesus Christ, that's the goal, to see people come to know Jesus as their Savior, have a relationship with the living, risen Savior. He is Jesus. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Please do stay safe.